Hi everybody, welcome to this lesson video where we're going to be looking at some documents for this unit. And these documents are going to connect to a common theme of America moves west. And as you look at these documents, I want you to be keeping the following key concepts in mind. The United States expanded its borders during the 1800s by purchasing land from France and Spain, and new types of technology and transportation changed America during the first half of the 1800s. So let's start with our first document, take a look at it, and we'll be back to discuss the questions. Okay, so this map shows us the Louisiana Purchase, America's first real big land acquisition. An acquisition is something you get, you acquire. In this case, we purchased it, we bought it from France in 1803. We already gained some land before that. We gained this land at the end of the American Revolution. So just to review, here were the original 13 colonies. Then we fought the American Revolution, and at the end of the war, England gave us this land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, which is the eastern border of the Louisiana Purchase. And this purchase of land actually doubled the size of the United States. This was a huge, huge deal for us. We spent $15 million, which was an incredible deal, only a few pennies an acre. An acre of land today in Greece, I'd say most homes sit on less than an acre of land. But if you were to purchase an acre of land in Greece and try to build a house on it, that land would cost you thousands of dollars today. So to put that in perspective, just a few pennies an acre to buy the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And I just wanted to show you that the state of Louisiana is much smaller than the actual Louisiana Purchase. So this land here is the territory that we bought from France in 1803, but then we turned that territory into many different states: Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and part of Louisiana. So the state of Louisiana today, I'm tracing the border right now. This is the border of Louisiana today. It's not the whole thing. The Louisiana Purchase actually gave us many different states. And once we bought it, we decided to explore it. Thomas Jefferson, who was the president at the time, sent two famous explorers, Lewis and Clark, with a group of explorers, including eventually the famous Native American woman Sacagawea. And they traveled by foot and by boat, most of the time pushing and dragging the boat up the Missouri River. They explored the Louisiana Territory, made contact with many different Native American groups, and then they kept going. They actually left what was then the United States, and they made it all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back, a journey of about 8,000 miles, and it took them a little under 2.5 years. And along the way, they were actually asked to make friends with the Native American groups that they met, and they were given these peace medals to pass out to the Native American groups. And a few years ago, the U.S. government decided to commemorate Lewis and Clark's journey and the Louisiana Purchase with a series of coins. So if you've seen a quarter with the state of Louisiana on the back, it will show you the Louisiana Purchase. And then the bottom here, the foot, that's actually the state of Louisiana. And also the boat, this is on the 5-cent piece, the nickel, the commemorative nickel for Lewis and Clark. This is the boat that they used to travel up the Missouri River. And then you also have a replica of that peace medal. Okay, next document, take a look. We'll be back to talk about the questions. So what we've got here is a chart showing the population of the United States of America, decade by decade. And of course, we see that population increasing from 1790 to 1860. And when we look at this time period from 1790 to 1830, what we see is that between those years, the population of the United States of America tripled in size. So the population is growing. And we know this because every 10 years, the United States government takes a count. They count up the population, and that is called the census. And it's important that they get that those numbers right, because remember, the population of your state determines how many representatives you have in Congress and how many votes you have in the government. So every 10 years, the government literally goes door to door, and they also send out forms in the mail for people to fill out and send back so that they can get that accurate census count of the population. But let's go beyond 1860, and let's check out the growth of the United States population all the way up to modern times. And we can see, of course, that the population has just continued to we might say explode in the United States of America, to the point where today we have over 300 million people living in our country, compared to, say, 1840, there were about 20 million. So this next document is actually two documents. I'm going to ask you to compare the two documents. And what it's showing you is the population density. This is not quite the same as the overall population. The density is telling you how many people are living within a certain area. And in this case, we're going to go with per square mile. So the areas on these maps that are green would be less than 2 people living per square mile. The areas of purple would be 2 to 17 people living per square mile. The yellow would be 18 to 90 people living per square mile. And the colors in red are going to be showing areas where there are over 90 people living in each square mile. So please take a look at these two maps, compare them, answer the questions. We'll be back to talk about it. So what we're really seeing here is the population density is increasing from the east, which is here, to the west. So the movement of the population is definitely westward. We see the reds and the yellows and even the purples expanding in this direction across the United States. And also, what we're noticing is that the most heavily densely populated areas are going to be areas, for the most part, located near lakes, on rivers, or in coastal areas, because those are areas where you have a good transportation network, where you can move people and you can move goods, which we're going to see in a few later documents. But let's again look at modern times. And we can see on this population density map from the year 2000 that the United States today actually has an average population density of about 87 people per square mile. That's almost 90. So the areas of red here, which would have been the most densely populated areas in 1860, well, basically the whole country practically on average is red today. But that's a little bit misleading, because there are actually lots of areas out west, the greens, these aqua blues, if we look down at our key here, where there's actually less than 1 person living per square mile. So this, of course, is going to be desert area and mountainous areas and wilderness, which I think is one of the really magical things about our country, is that we still have a lot of wilderness left. We have a lot of empty land where there's forests and animals and wildlife, and it's important to preserve that, in my opinion. But when you look at the east coast of the United States, on this map, remember those areas on the previous map that were red, and that would be 90 people per square mile? Well, the red on this map, we're going to call it pink, is actually 1,000 people or more per square mile. And on the next map here, sort of a bonus document, I'm going to ask you to try to identify where you live in the United States of America, and then we'll talk about the population density here in the Rochester area. Okay, so the correct answer was B, all right? This pink blob here, that's Monroe County. That's our county, with a population of over 1,000 people on average living per square mile. Now, that doesn't mean there's 1,000 people per square mile everywhere in Monroe County. There are some areas where it's not quite so densely populated. That's an average. But still, that's pretty astounding to see over 1,000 people square mile in the year 2000, whereas back in the year, say, 1860, you probably could not have gone anywhere in America where that many people were living that close together. Okay, next document, check it out. This is a map which is going to give you some information on canals and rivers. So we want to always check our title, a network of canals, and our key, which is here. And on our key, we're going to see that these lines with a little sort of hatch marks on them, these red lines, those are indicated by canals. And the blue lines are showing navigable rivers. Navigable means you would be able to take a boat on the river for transportation. Well, I think the title says it all with this document, a network of canals. And of course, canals are man-made. They're basically man-made rivers that are dug by hand. I think I have a picture here a couple slides in where we have some canal workers from the 1800s. They literally dug these canals with shovels. This is before they had big, heavy construction equipment like today. So canals are man-made rivers that are used to connect real rivers and lakes together. For example, if you lived down in New York City and you wanted to travel to Toledo, Ohio, instead of walking, you could take the Hudson River, you could get on a boat, go up the Hudson River, which eventually came to an end, right? You can't go anywhere once the river ends. So what they did is they dug this canal, the Erie Canal, across New York State. I'm going to show you another map here. 363 miles across New York State to connect the Hudson River with Lake Ontario and especially Lake Erie. And this created a sort of superhighway network, a water superhighway of canals, rivers, lakes, where you could travel really just about as far as Chicago. And before that, you would have had to be going on foot through forests, over mountains, really hazardous, difficult way to travel. You can always move things easier by boat. That's really a simple rule of thumb in transportation. Even today, most of the cargo that is moved across this planet is still moved by boat. It's just the simplest, easiest way to move things. So a network of canals was all about connecting the western part, or actually this area, today we call this the Midwest, Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, connecting the Midwest with the East and giving people a way to move their goods. This isn't just about moving people. It's about moving goods like farm goods and equipment from one side of the country westward to the other. Back to our New York State map, I wanted to mention the local connection that we have with the Erie Canal. Here's a picture of the canal. Of course, the canal is practically right here in our backyard. We're fortunate enough to live in the area where the Erie Canal was built. And I wanted to mention that the villages that you guys have all heard of, Spencerport, Brockport, Fairport, sometimes we wonder, where did these names come from? Well, they were called ports because these are all villages that sprouted up along the Erie Canal as it was being built. Of course, a port is a village or town or city where boats can stop and dock and unload their goods. Also, Lockport, if you head out towards Buffalo. These are all Erie Canal towns. Now, today, these towns don't rely on the Erie Canal anymore. The Erie Canal still has boats on it, but most goods are moved by truck or even by train. The Erie Canal doesn't serve that same purpose anymore, but it is part of our history, and it's right here locally in New York State. Our next document is going to be a chart. Let's break this down, always starting with the title, Chart Comparing Travel by Dirt Road and Travel by Erie Canal. So we have two sides of the chart. Here's the canal side, and here's the dirt road side. And we're going to see the method on the dirt road side is wagons and horses. The method on the canal side, line boats and mules. And then it's going to tell you the amount of time it would take to move a certain amount of cargo a certain distance by dirt road and by canal. And the cost of doing that by dirt road and by canal. So check out the questions and we'll be right back to discuss. And so the main idea of this chart really goes back to something that I said earlier, that it is always easier to move things by water. And in this case, what we see is that it was quicker to move cargo and freight by canal than it was by dirt road. And so the canal system was really a big improvement on the old transportation network, which was simply dirt roads and paths that were cut through the wilderness, and also cheaper for the same reason. If it takes less time to do something and less effort, then it's going to cost less money. So the Erie Canal, specifically the Erie Canal, dropped the price of shipping goods from $100 a ton to $6 a ton. And that would have been true along other canal networks as well. Now, one thing you might have been wondering about here is the mules, right? So if dirt roads used wagons drawn by horses, then why do we have mules on the canal side of the chart? Well, it's because these boats, which were called packet boats, were often pulled by mules. So what they would do, the mules wouldn't swim. They would tie the mules to the boat, and then the mules would pull the boat by walking along the side of the canal. And these paths that the mules would pull the boat along, these paths along the side of the canal were called tow paths. And they're still there. I know I grew up in Brockport, and I used to ride my bike along the canal. It's a really nice, smooth path made out of crushed rock, and it was always called the tow path. And when I got to social studies class, I figured out why, because my teacher told me about the mules pulling the boats along the tow path on the Erie Canal. So our next document, check it out. It is a bar graph showing miles of railroad track in the U.S. So this was a pretty easy document showing a huge increase in the miles of railroad track in the United States. Between 1840 and 1860, we saw over 25,000 miles of railroad track being built. And this was all for a transportation network involving trains, a new invention and improvement over the old canal system and the old dirt road system, because trains could basically go anywhere. You could build a railroad track anywhere. You didn't need to rely on a nearby river or lake like a canal. And once you did build that track, those trains could pull many, many cars full of tons and tons of cargo and hundreds of passengers. So here's another map showing the year 1870. So we're seeing that we're moving forward through the 1800s, and by 1870, we had many, many, many miles of railroad track, mostly in the eastern United States. But you see this one line of track running clear across the country, and that is called the Transcontinental Railroad. Transcontinental means it went right across the continent from the East Coast to the West. It was built by two railroad companies, one working from the east, moving westward, and one working from the west, moving eastward. And in 1869, they met at Promontory Point, Utah. So this is the moment that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and that is why the Utah Quarter has a picture of these two trains face to face on the back. And this spike, this is a railroad spike that was used to connect the rails, the steel rails, with the wooden ties. And as the story goes, when they completed the Transcontinental Railroad, the last spike that they drove in was made out of solid gold. And of course, this was big news. When the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, the news traveled to the east via a new communications network. So we have a new method of transportation, the train, but we also have a new method of communication called the telegraph. So here are telegraph poles. You may have seen this picture and thought maybe these are telephone poles or electric line poles. But these are for the telegraph because the telephone had not been invented yet. This is before cell phones. This is before any kind of communication, really, other than word of mouth. So the first big improvement in communication moving towards modern day was the telegraph. The telegraph could send short pulses of electricity across a telegraph wire. Now, this is not enough electricity, say, to plug in a hairdryer or something like that. They had not figured out how to use electricity in that way just yet. It's not going to be until the early 1900s that American homes are going to have electricity. But they did have this device where you push down on the handle, which makes an electric connection here. If you just tap it, just a quick tap, then it sends one short pulse of electricity over the telegraph wire. And the person on the other end can hear that and write it down as a dot. If you push this handle down and you make the connection and you hold it for a second or two, it's going to send a longer pulse of electricity across the telegraph wire. And the person on the other end will hear that and write it down as a dash. And you can combine these dashes and dots, these long pulses and these short pulses, into a code for letters, which can spell words, and then the words can string together into sentences, and thus sending a short message across the country. And this is what it would have sounded like. So new inventions are being used for transportation, moving people and goods, but also for communication. Now, the train relied on a new type of power called steam power and the steam engine. Here's how the steam engine works. It's pretty simple, actually. This is not like a gasoline engine today where it required, gasoline or diesel fuel. It simply required water and a firebox, which would be used to heat the water up into steam, and then the steam would be used to push a piston. This is called the piston here, going back and forth, which could then use linkages and levers to turn wheels. The steam engine could be used not just in transportation like trains, but also in factories. Although here is a factory where they are building trains, but also factories which were running machines. So here's a textile mill where steam-powered machines are being used to spin thread, and then the thread is being used to spin cloth. And here we are with our final group of documents. I'm going to show you 3 maps. And I bet you've never seen a map like this before because these are actually time maps. These maps are showing you the rate of travel in the year 1800, the year 1830, and a third map, the year 1857. I've added on the names of the Great Lakes for a reference for you. So this is Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, Lake Erie, and our lake, Lake Ontario. So here is where Rochester would be located right here. And then what you want to pay attention to is the lines. The lines indicate the time. So this is the 1 week line. This is the 4-day line. This is the 1-day line. And on all of these maps, what we're assuming is that your starting point is here in New York City. And the lines show you how far you can go within that reference of time. So on this map here, map A, if you started in New York City and you traveled for 1 day in any given direction, this is how far you could get. So if you traveled in this direction, you would get this far in 1 day. If you traveled this direction, you would get this far in 1 day. If you traveled for a week, starting in New York City, we're going to find our 1 week line here. If you traveled for a week and you moved in this direction, you would be able to get that far. If you traveled in this direction, after 1 week, you would reach this far. If you traveled for 1 week in this direction, you'll get that far. So that is how you read a time map or a rate of travel map. And you're going to be comparing 3 maps. I'm going to put these 2 maps on the screen, answer the questions for map A and B, and then I will put map C on the screen. And with this last set of documents, of course, we see an increase in the rate of travel across the country between the year 1800 and 1857. So Americans are moving westward, and they're able to do so quicker and easier than ever before due to new inventions and new transportation networks like the canal system and eventually the transcontinental railroad. Thanks for watching this document video. Be sure to complete the follow-up quiz, and we'll see you next time.